Awesome. Hello. Welcome to the penultimate Substrate sync for 2025. I think the last one might be on the 31st, but we'll see if people show up to that. It's got a couple of items on the agenda for this week. I think, Ben, you've added the first one, which is, I'll let you explain it.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask people's advice on how this best should be represented in Substrate. We basically want to be able to take a plan and mark boundaries to say, this subtree of the plan should be executed on one particular engine, and this subtree should be executed on another particular engine, and then maybe the results get stitched together. And as far as I know, that there isn't some standard way to kind of mark a subtree as being destined for one execution context. The way that we were planning on modeling it internally is to just have an extension single rel with detail field called like execution context or something that has a field called destination. And you basically just set that, and then it just takes in the single relation, and that marks the subtree. But I was curious if other people had thought about this before, and if maybe there's any appetite for figuring out a more standard substrate way for handling this.
There are a few things because I'm also I don't know, like internally trying to come up with some sort of like envelope protocol. So envelope protocol means you have a distributed scheduler, and then you send a query. It's a distributed, basically scheduling request. This scheduling request consists of like, essentially it has a graph of like substrate, mini substrate, and the structure defines the overall structure of how these mini substrates are organized and how the dependencies. However, it doesn't need to know about individual substrate. What is actually in the graph, like it doesn't need to know about the detail about the substrate. If we wish, it can, but it doesn't. If it doesn't care, it doesn't need to. So that's the one line of thoughts that I don't know. Maybe if I can come up with something. I mean, it's been on my agenda for a while now, but yeah. So that's one line of thoughts. So kind of like related to from like how to organize like these different segments and so on. And internally in SQL Server, this has been done as a part of the demoting, or so in SQL Server we have demoting operator, which draws a boundary. So the demote operator includes essentially what you described, the execution context, and it's just there, and everything below that demote operator will be shipped to the other engine. So that's another way. If we were, I don't know, I'm fine with having a demote operator equivalent because we already have one. Having something standard along that, I think it's fine.
I think the trick is, if you have a remote operator, the trick is encoding the destination in a way that's portable in the upstream, where at least for us, it's pretty straightforward to have an internal remote operator, which is like, hey, remote operator and our specific backends, but actually encoding a generic one where you can add the metadata you would need to for your own system would be a little bit more work, I think, but not a ton.
Though it could always just be an any, and you say it's up to you to figure out, what that thing should be. I also wanted to bring up, there is the exchange relation, which is kind of similar. I think maybe Victor, you and I had talked about it potentially being a solution here. So that's one avenue. It could be expanded to kind of include this.
Yeah, I'm slightly against the exchange. So I want to reserve the exchange to be internal to the engine, rather than so yeah. I want to draw like clear boundary between
exchange is more specifically as well for like partitioning and distribution within like a single engine versus like distributing to a separate engine.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I agree that the way it stands now, it would not make sense to use it. It could be a strategy, but I'm not committed to that. I'd be happy to have a new relation too.
Yeah.
Well, so I'm going to push back on that a little bit because I feel like if this is one plan and you have a subtree, the data has to get from the subtree to the parent tree, right?
Mhm.
Like because that's why it's one plan. Is the data is moving between the subtree and the parent tree, right? In your case, Ben.
Mhm.
So that
Well,
to me,
the
that's
process
the
data.
definition of an exchange. Exchange is moving between two systems.
Hmm.
Like,
That's a good
I'm not
point.
saying. So let me clarify. I think this may be a different way of thinking about it. I think that there must be an exchange to move between the systems, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's some movement that's going between the two systems. Now, exchanges often include other parameters like changes in parallelization, changes in partitioning, etc. So it sounds like in your case, those don't exist. So I agree that exchanges are not about assignment, which is I kind of think what Young Chul is saying about exchanges. Like that's kind of different. What you're talking about is you really want to talk about assignment. Like this chunk of stuff is being assigned someplace. But in terms of like, if I were to model what I think is your flow of data moving between multiple systems, different systems doing sub plans and whatnot, I would definitely model that as an exchange. In between, every time there's a transition between one system and another system. In fact, I have done that in the past, right? And so then you make the decisions at the exchange boundaries about what this subtree, where this subtree can be assigned. Now, generally speaking, and I don't know if I did this in the Substrate spec because I don't think most people worked with the exchanges stuff at all. But in the logical phase, I've thought of exchanges as a composite. But in the physical phase, or in a more physical phase, I thought of them. They got disconnected into senders and receivers. Because it's really two sides to an exchange, right? There's what's being executed on the consumer side, what's being executed on the producer side. And so then the producer side, yeah. So anyway, so I feel like exchange is exactly what your plan is actually doing. The assignment thing, the question I had in my head as you were talking about it was, we have the ability for there to be multiple subtrees that are defined at the plan level. I'm wondering whether or not that's a better place to store assignment information. So if you have 5 subtrees and you know they're assigned to different places, you list the assignments at the, I don't remember what's called, the root rel, the plan rel. I don't remember the name of the object, but basically we associate the additional metadata at that level. And so it basically forces you to build the subtrees as separate subtrees in the plan rather than having one mega tree. Because you want to assign that stuff. But I kind of feel like that's probably not unreasonable in the case that like you're really going to be breaking apart the plan at those boundaries anyway, most likely.
That was actually a thing that was discussed briefly internally too, this idea of representing them as just additional relations at the plan level and then using reference rels to embed them inside of the plan. That's what you're saying, right? I think the hesitation, which I'm talking like I know something, and I literally know nothing about the inner workings of Calcite at all. But what I was told is that Calcite doesn't really have good handling for reference relations. And this is very particular to our data flow. But our optimizer is Calcite. And so my understanding is we would end up inlining those things anyways. So there would just have to be some magic.
I agree with that comment that in Calcite you would inline them. But that doesn't mean you need to inline them when they're in, like if you know that if we're using Calcite
you can uninline them.
Yeah. When you hit a trait change, right, which I think you're probably modeling as traits inside of Calcite.
We have. When
you hit that trait change, you would just break it out into a subplan.
In Calcite, we actually have boundary representations that we use. So we actually have a transition node, which is how we say, hey, this subtree is this other thing that we image a subtree. Okay. You could actually encode that as different relations on the plan root. We will still need to figure out where do we assign the metadata to be like, hey, this subtree is actually for like Postgres, this one's for Elasticsearch, this one's for data fusion and that. Yeah. So the one of I was suggesting, at least, I'm not arguing, I'm not, this is not strongly held. It's just it's an idea. Brainstorm. Was that whatever the object is that's at the plan, is it, I just can't remember the names of the objects. Is it plan rel?
and root
Well,
rel.
plan rel message has rels on it, which are either rel roots or rels.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe you add a third one there, which is assigned rel, something like that. So it's assigned rel, and that subtree is assigned to a particular location. Like I would say, hang it off of the rel there, except the rel apparently, like I'm struggling with the rules around protobuf. That like you can't do it that way, but yeah. So relate. So plan rel is one of rel root or rel. So I'm saying in that one of right there, it's unfortunate that we don't have rel in a message. So you can't just be like, let's add assignment as optional metadata that's on that message. So I'd be like, okay, like add another one, which is like, super rel. That's the rel plus some other subtree information that you want to collect for that subtree. That was good as one, but that's a brainstorm. It's a long-winded brainstorm.
It sounds like there's at least two people who have this problem, which is us and Youngshul, and there's at least like two kind of ideas about how to approach this. But I don't think we don't need to solve this now. But this is also for us. Like, has anyone else thought about this? And it sounds like yes, people have thought about it. So that's good.
Okay.
Yeah, we may end up just solving it with the extension single rel strategy internally for now anyways, but my preference is always if it's actually a generalizable problem to figure out how to put it in the upstream as well. So
yeah, I'm going to ask a question which is kind of not exactly substrate. I'm just curious about your guys' thinking. It sounds like you aren't currently modeling those as exchanges in calcite.
No.
And is that just because you exchanged, you didn't like it? I mean, it's in calcite, it's easy to add new rels, so it's like, I'll just make my own rel.
Add new rels. I mean,
Custom.
in historical context with the person who wrote a bunch of that code back when we were doing it, was also when I was learning about calcite. So a lot of stuff. I think we actually did use exchangers at one point for modeling data exchangers within a specific system. So we kind of use exchangers in one system, and then we have like, what's the word I'm looking for? We have the convention transformations, or where we model the exchange of data. We didn't have an exchange. We used the natural, like, go from our, Postgres convention to our data fusion convention as kind of like that explicit node that gets added by data fusion or calcite anyways during planning is a natural point for here's where the data exchange happens. And we did use distribution properties to some extent, and we could persist those between the boundaries, but we don't really use exchanges for that explicitly. But if that's still the case, I think it's still the case. We'll see if we ever use exchanges. We did hire Alessandro Solimando a while back, so we have someone who actually knows what they're doing inside, which is great.
Yeah, he's awesome.
I'm learning a lot about how I'm using calcite wrong. But I think that's okay. I think Ben, the point of that note was to identify interest, and there's interest.
Yeah, I'm satisfied with that discussion. So
something that I've been thinking about, this has come up also internally in a couple places, is this actually also applies maybe Youngshul to your limit with fetch size and sort, is that there's a common use case that pops up in various places of we have a relation on which we want to attach specifically limit and sort metadata and possibly other things where we don't want to have a decoupled plan. This has come up internally where we have a request for like aggregates with specific sort and limits attached to them. It's kind of top K-ish. You can model it as top K. But maybe this pattern of I want to be able to capture an operation with a specific other like common enhancement on it, like limits, as a single node that my target system can consume as one or expand out. And I wonder if that actually might make sense to include as a core enhancement. So for context, imagine Youngshul had a proposal for adding fetch with ties for the fetch row. So that's effectively take a limit, and if there's sort, if we sort equivalently, then emit multiple columns. And that required us to add kind of sort information into the limit or limit information into the sort. And that kind of makes those messages a bit redundant, but maybe another way to approach this would be, we have a sort and you can attach a limit to it with fetch ties, or you have a limit and you can attach a sort to it. And you can also attach sorts to projects or sorts to other things if you want to, as a planner, optimize that. And you as a consuming system can ignore them. but maybe you can make use of them to unify these operations. Anyway, this is me spitballing. The part of the issue is that over time, I feel like we're going to end up with, oh, we have to add a limit to aggregate rel for some operations, and we have to add a limit to sorts, and I feel like we'll end up duplicating these things, where maybe we just need like a mix of ways.
Let's pick one of those for a minute. I want to talk about limit with aggregate. Are you saying that limit with aggregate is a different kind of operation, or is it just a composite operation that does an aggregate and a limit in a single, like is it logically different? Or
it's not logically different having a limit followed by an aggregate, with the caveat being that the system processing it doesn't necessarily know to look for the limit aggregate thing, and also in finding they can become separate.
So to me, the very simple version of this, I think, that matches what you're describing is the in clause or dilemma, right? You can always express an in clause as a collection of or statements. But at the time when you're doing the actual work, you don't want to actually have to figure out that all these or statements actually can be recomposed into a massive in, which can then be turned into a join as opposed to being a expression evaluation. And so it's like, it's useful to know that this is a particular composite plan, a composite object, right? Like that this is a limit and a sort together, and let people recognize that that's a limit and a sort together. You said, do we have the same concept with regrel and filters? That's slightly different, only because there's the concept of best effort filters. So there is the concept of yeah, but yes, similar.
You could make the case motion that you could attach like a filter enhancement as well. It could be another mechanism that you want to attach to a regrel.
The question I have is that ignoring how a programmer would write this for a minute, right? Because if a programmer sitting down and writing a relation which is an aggregate filter combined, right? They would write it with that in mind, and it would be one object with a certain set of fields. Would the idea of an abstract composite, and I'm wondering about it in both this context and this, the subplan assignment thing is a little bit more problematic because it has to have additional breaks in it, so it can't contain like going back to the previous conversation for a moment. To me, the challenge of the previous conversation is that and why I like the idea of breaking it into subtrees that are in that root rel is because I'm imagining a situation where the top, the root of the tree is system A, then there's some intermediate segments that are systems B and C, and then there's some child segments that are, D, E, and F or something like that. And in that pattern, you don't have a contains pattern. Like that middle one where the top one and the middle one both have to have assignments, but you shouldn't be assigning the children below a certain level, right? So it's kind of like a boundary in the condition. I'm wondering whether or not there's a utility to the concept of a composite, a single input composite and a multi-input composite, where it is a composite relation, and you can put relations inside of that relation. Okay, and the childmost relations of that relation, if they're not input nodes like read rels, they can actually refer to the inputs of the composite. So let's say we define a single composite relation. A single composite relation has one input, one output. Okay. Inside of it, it must contain a plan, and that plan can refer to the input to the composite relation. And that plan's output is the output of the composite relation. So in your example, if you wanted to put aggregate and sort together, let's say, you take the composite relation, you put an aggregate and sort inside of that. And let's say it was, aggregate was a child of sort, right? It was like sort, aggregate, then sort. Maybe sort, then aggregate. I don't know, whatever it is, right? Whatever is the one that's going to take the initial input to the composite operation, instead of referring to, there's some way that it expresses, and I don't know what the exact way to do this, but it basically expresses that it refers to its container, which maybe was what Zhang Li was talking about when he was talking about envelopes. But it's basically this idea that it's a composite relation where the inner relations can refer to the thing, the composite world inside the composite, only. But then, and maybe you have metadata at the composite. And so in your case, right, if you want to put a sort and filter together, you can put them inside of a composite. You can name it this, you can put some metadata at the level, which is like, hey, this is a sort filter. And for systems that want to see that as a single operation, they can, and they probe properties of that operation. And for systems that don't want to deal with a composite, they just rip the composite out and inline the stuff directly.
I guess to take a step back, I think we agreed. It's not like we have agreement possibly on the problem we're trying to fix here, or figure out here, which is that there are some systems where it's actually useful to be able to figure out, here's a combined operation. In your example of the in subquery, it's like, we could express that as something else, but having a system know it is like an in subquery is quite useful. Other example this comes up with actually is in cross join, where for you can model a cross join as an equality join on true equals true. But it's nice to use the cross join, which is more specific. Which, like, this is the most specific version of this. You can model it elsewhere, but we don't want to throw away information. And the context we're talking about here is we want to be able to capture, hey, we have an aggregate or a sort for a limit, and we want to attach it as like, specifically, if you can do something with all of this combined, you can be smart about it. You don't need to. And whether or not that's through a separate node, or where we layer like other relations, or through enhancements on relations, is kind of a details question. But I think that's the problem we're trying to fix, maybe, is that there are operations where keeping stuff together in context is useful for some engines. And then how do we represent that in a way that is extendable and doesn't create many relation variants?
Yeah. So adding the ties to the fetch rel is exactly trying to capture the intent in a single operator. So yeah, so that's basically, and there are like two things. I think from the logical perspective, if the operation is like logically like one operations, it could be decomposed. But if it is like you cannot really separate, otherwise like you get really clunky, then I think it's better stay at that logical like one operator level. If it goes to physical, then sure, you can do whatever you want. You can have like slice and dice, like whatever. And so I don't know, like to me, I'm dragging this conversation to the fetch rel with ties. But yeah, so the fetch rel, the with tie operation is inherently tied to the sort. Without sort order, it has like no meaning. So that's why I included the sort, and it can be either extend the sort with the limit, or extend fetch with some information about the sort. So that's I think this is another version of like this conversation. Yeah.
And that's why I was thinking of you when I thought of this, right?
Yeah.
You have a similar pattern of there's composite information that you need to have a node that combines it, otherwise it doesn't make sense to do so.
Mm-hmm.
I think about it, let's say that we were just working in strings, just to be really simple here, like that, get rid of all the algebra, blah blah blah, right? Like what I think of is that like what you're really saying is that sometimes I have a string ABC, and I have a way to do ABC efficiently if I know it's ABC. But at the moment when I'm trying to figure out what I should do, it's too expensive to realize that there's the pattern ABC. Or it's, yeah, I think that would be the way to say it, is it's too expensive to figure out at the moment of execution that ABC is actually, that pattern actually exists. And I know early on that it is ABC. So I want to write down, hey, this is ABC early on, so that later I'll be like, oh shit, this is ABC. I'm going to take advantage of that pattern. And I think the in to me is a perfect example of that, right? Where it's like, oh, this is a specific pattern of OR statements or equality statements. And so it's quite expensive to figure that out later, right? You got to walk the entire expression tree and normalize it and figure out if those pieces are all over, figure out what portion can be applied in this way. It's quite expensive to figure that out, but it turns out that people actually tell you early on that that's a certain pattern that exists, or you may have more context earlier on that helps you figure that out. And so to me, that's the main pattern is that basically like fetch with ties is an example of that too to me, which is basically it's like the user has this very certain intent. Like you can write fetch with ties without the fetch with ties implementation in SQL Server. I assume you could write it in Postgres. It'd be a complicated query, right? And then decomposing that into a fetch with ties operation because you realize that this set of operations in sequence provide that result is hard.
Sorry, I don't know. To implement the fetch with tie, you need to implement some sort of like window aggregation or like the rank and so on, and then do some mass or
I agree. Yeah. No, what I'm saying is that like if we decomposed it in like what I was saying was, Young Chul, is if we can actually express fetch with ties with the stuff we have already. But it would be ridiculously complicated for the execution engine. It's not helpful to decompose it that way, right? Like for your system, you already have an expression at the front end that is more compact, and you have an implementation at the back end that's built for just that thing, right?
Yeah.
So like it's not helpful to decompose.
Sure. Yeah.
That's all I'm saying is that like it's not like these are examples of situations where it's not helpful to decompose into primitives, but you can. And so in the spirit, see, here's the thing is that in the spirit of a cross-platform system, it's helpful to be able to understand that things can be decomposed.
That, sure.
And that's kind of where like the composite idea comes in, or the extension idea comes in, where if I'm a system that I get like, oh, I get my fetch rel with a sort attached to it via composition or some mechanism, and I don't know what to do with that composite. I'm like, well, I know it's the sort followed by a limit, so I can at least decompose it into that internally. But if I know how to handle it, I can be like, oh no, this is a special thing that I can now identify because it's all here. Let me do the special thing.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's a really important, I think that fetch with rels is very different than like sort plus filter or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, because I kind of feel like fetch with rels is a relatively complicated algebraic expression. Like if you were to actually decompose it into primitives, whereas I feel like what's that?
Fetch with ties, or sorry, saying fetch with ties.
Sorry, yeah, fetch with ties. Sorry, fetch with ties. Yeah, I feel like that's a very complicated algebraic expression. Whereas I feel like like many systems have filter aggregate limit composites, right? Like that's a very there's several composites that happen in physical systems quite frequently because it's efficient to do them together, and they're almost always expressed together. So I buy that.
Are you talking about supporting like n rows per group? Is that
yeah, I'm saying like a composite is an abstract class, or whatever. It's like you can create a composite, you can put a tree in it, and the tree can refer, like the inner tree can refer to the inputs of the outer tree. So it's a rel, and you can treat it like a rel and just move it around like a single rel, right? But inside that rel is a subtree, and the subtree can be of arbitrary size.
That's I see. Not necessarily a. Okay, so this is more, if I understand correctly, this is more like say apply, which is also related to the generate rel in the PR. So essentially, you for each row in the input, you are running some plan and get the output. Is that similar?
I don't think I think of it as a set operation, not as a row wise operation.
But then the set,
right? Like because it could be that the only relation inside the composite is a sort.
I see. So okay. So that okay.
Having opened this can of worms, I might have to close it and revisit this on the Slack.
Okay. Yeah.
It sounds like there is some interest in this idea of composition as a common pattern and being able to be like, hey, these operations, if you combine them, if you care about it, we can combine them for you either in planning or execution, and you can leverage that to do special things. But if you don't know what they are, don't worry about it. And the details are probably best on Slack. Because also if we talk about composite roles of a subtree, then I'm going to need an example sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think that the key to me is that what composite allows you to do is it allows you to time metadata to a sub pattern, right? And so you could say, this is exactly this pattern. Here's the actual tree, but it's exactly this pattern. And so if you have a downstream system that's looking for exactly this pattern, it knows that that's the case, right? And if someone goes in there and messes with that plan, they have to, like that, they can no longer you can't go inside the composite and mess with that plan and maintain that the metadata at the top is the same. Like that doesn't make any sense, right? Because at that point, you've messed the pattern. It's not that pattern anymore.
Yeah, I think they're actually, I mean, one way to generalize it is basically this composite, whatever the wrapping operator could be think of as it can be either just, yeah, it's a grouping essentially. So you just wrap your input wrap it as a single group and then feed it to the whatever nested plan. Or this can be the wrapping thing actually do the grouping, group the rows, and then feed it, and then apply or run this whatever nested thing for each group and then produce the output. So I mean, yeah.
I'm going to move this to Slack just to
the
topics, and also this can use examples for sure.
Okay.
Ben, another non-controversial topic. I'm sure that was explain, analyze.
Yeah, this just came up. Boshin actually brought up if we should talk about it here. We have kind of appetite internally now to basically be able to do explain on plans, so like getting a bunch of information back from the engine and whatnot. And another thing where we are having discussions right now internally about how best to represent it. And, there's a couple ideas, one of them just being something like a plan level enhancement or that kind of thing. But I also wanted to bring it up to see if it's something other people wanted and if it made sense to try and figure out a way to upstream it into the official spec.
What we're sort of thinking about for internally right now is just actually having a plan level extension. So like for this substrate plan we send to your system, if you see this like explain enhancement attached to it at the root of the plan, then don't actually run the plan, but give us back some kind of explain output. And that potentially could live in the upstream, or we could just do it ourselves for a while. But
so the main comment I'm going to make here, because I kind of feel like it's a like I generally think that it's helpful to think about data as moving through no matter what the operation is. And so to make that more concrete, in the example there was some work that Carlo and I did years ago that was about like, it was update or merge or something with certain semantics, and there's outputs like I think you can declare in the merge what records return, or I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was this interesting question, which is, and I think create table as is a perfect example of this, which is what is the output of the write route, right? And it's metadata, it's not data anymore, right? But metadata is just data. Right. And so from Substrait's perspective, I think it's helpful to model things as relations and just say the data is moving through it. Now, maybe in one case that the data is a tabular data, with a bunch of rows. And it may be in another case that an operator returns a single column with a single row that is the explain plane. Right.
Yeah, you can make a case for explain rel being a rel that takes another subtree as input and then outputs like the two columns or some output. It does get a bit weird.
Well, it's not an input. That's the key thing, is it's not an input, because the input is the plan itself, not the data that the plan represents. It's really a configuration property. So I would say that, yeah, you create an explain rel and you put a field, which is like the plan that you want explained, and then it returns the plan. So I don't know if it's critical that that actually be in the project, but I think that generally speaking, when I try to think about these things, I try to say like, keep it with the primitives, which is, this is data moving through a system, and this is an operation that we execute, and the operation has properties. And that operation may have children that take inputs, right? So like, because then it can be composable. Because if you wanted to say like, hey, read these 10 queries from the database and explain each of them, you could actually build a plan that says that, right? Because if explain rel is an input, is the plan, you could be like, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna get the input, I'm gonna compose it and stick it in that kind of thing. Like that's
you
to me is like
explain of 10 queries.
Exactly. Well, so I'm not saying that that's a real thing, but it's like one of those things where it's like, if we can stick with the primitives, then these things are composable, and you don't have to deal with a bunch of new ideas when you're trying to deal with plans. Because otherwise what happens is, when you're working in the execution system, you have a giant case statement at the top of the execution statement for looking at the plan to decide what kind of plan is this, because you need to handle it completely different, because some plans return data and some plans, like, call into another system and don't actually return data, and it's just challenging.
So I still don't get what this thing is about.
What explain plan is about?
No. I mean, is it like trying to adding a rel, or?
I think they're saying we're trying to solve for
it, and we
explain
have-
plan. Should we do it
rel
in
versus
Substrate?
intent. Sorry, this is us asking, like, we're thinking about modeling this. Do other people have thoughts about how to model this as well?
Yeah, my inclination would be is to do it as a custom rel, which has a property, which is the plan, but not do it in Substrate. Like, not do the act. Don't try to introduce explain as a Substrate rel, because the moment you introduce it as a Substrate rel, then we need to define the output as a consistent data representation.
Yeah.
Can this be
Right.
just a table function, or something, just standard extension that I don't know.
The table function is still taking that as input. It's not taking the plan as input, right? It's this meta operation.
Yeah, there's no way for an expression to be a plan. Well, there is, but like not in a way that the plan itself is inspectable, right? Substrate doesn't make itself like inspectable.
Right. So I mean, so the approach that Spark Connect uses is that it's a completely separate operation. So you would say execute this plan, and you can also say analyze this plan. And so we're basically saying we need to change this at we don't actually have a notion of execute or analyze, because that's that's the layer right outside of the substrate plan.
Yeah.
I mean, you're basically saying this is in the protocol that we have, like the protocol layer, and we've had some discussion. Jacques, what was that system? The thing we were talking about last year or earlier this year about trying to standardize a server for that.
The substrate input, or
there was the Aeroflight stuff, right? We have
Aeroflight would be one way. Aeroflight plus substrate.
Yeah, and Aeroflight I think actually already has that as a property. I think that they actually have a method for explain.
Yeah.
I think. Or maybe it's at Flight SQL. I don't remember what level it's at, but they have that need, I think.
Yeah. I think this is better stay outside of substrate, and I don't know. Yeah, that's my feeling.
I would agree.
Yeah,
on the
I agree.
things that I want to add to the core spec, there are a lot of other things, and we can definitely hack something or figure something out for ourselves for a while. Things that we care about more, table functions. Thank you, David, for generate lambdas. What else is up there? Jason, there's a lot of things that we care about more for sure.
Yeah, I think like the answer to there's three things that kind of come up, like the assignment, the composition, and then this one. I feel like assignment and composition, sweet spots, we should solve them. Like this one, outside.
Yeah,
that's totally fine. I just was curious. Yeah.
I mean, having pointers to other systems is always nice, though. I'm kind of curious what Spark does. Other thing that has come up, not from any of us actually, but this is someone in Data Fusion is looking at modeling recursive queries, and they're adding like an extension in Data Fusion for like recursive nodes. I believe that we can model recursive CTEs with
I don't think we implemented it.
Okay. That was my question. Is this feasible? I haven't done the work to figure out if you could or could not. But I wanted to ask.
I don't believe so, because you need a termination condition, and I don't think we have anything in place to allow for that. Not to say it's purposely excluded. Like, we should support it. I just don't believe we have the infrastructure for it. Right? Because it's basically a loop.
Yes.
It's basically a loop, and you need termination conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have loops.
Cool. Now, that takes me about like an hour of trying to model this, and then the question is, speaking of things that we probably care about more than explain, like people keep asking about recursive. People are trying to do recursive CT things, and they are unfortunately real and sometimes not my friend. But okay, might be worth looking at that.
Yeah, it's worth looking at it. I would actually probably, this is a good example of where I'd go and look at a couple other systems and how they do it algebraically, because it feels very not algebraic. It feels
interesting. Yeah.
It's just very procedural. It's like I don't know. It's not set. It's a very abstract set concept. Let's say that.
Cool. That answers that question. Oh, I had another small item. I was thinking of writing up a small yard report for the mailing list, just like new committers, PRs, and all that jazz. And I wanted to ask, before I found out someone else was also doing this. No, okay, I will do that. I'm getting the lock.
You're gonna check out the file like we did back in the day when it was Visual Source safe.
Effectively, it just predate my time.
See, all you people who never experienced that situation where you need to work on a file but someone else has it checked out.
I'm familiar with the law. I just never had to do it.
And then they went on vacation.
You're like, yeah, Air Force, whatever the state is.
Yeah, those early ones.
This means nothing to me.
Ben, you have one item, but I'm just going to mention there's two PR. There's at least one PR that's PMC ready, which is the Lambda one. It requires one more PMC to look at. There's two votes in it. One in the
Weston,
whose review is
I
great.
think actually got to it.
Oh, okay, cool. Never mind.
Right.
This is why I put it on the agenda. Thank you.
I did question the one more. Isn't it 3 for spec changes, or just 3 for breaking spec changes?
Governance.
Good.
Process or governance modifications and actions is free. Format or spec modifications is 2.
Okay. All good.
Thank you, Youngsho, for pointing this out to me about 3 months ago when I thought it was free for everyone. If Jackson and David want to take a look, please go. And Youngsho, you'll look at it, but you haven't really.
Yeah, I really want to go over it again. I'm like host till the end of the year because of some release crunch. So yeah, but it's fine. I can take a look the other day. I mean,
I think the main thing is here's a suggestion. Is what do we think about just putting a like, hey, this is an early version and subject to change on it? Not to say that isn't true for other things, but like if Youngchul realizes that like, hey, there's a couple of small modifications, like we should just all be like, yeah, we understand it. Like it's probably not set in stone even after it merges for a little bit. I'm not saying I'm saying let's be more open to doing breaking changes on that for the next little while than some of the other stuff.
We're not stable and happy to make breaking changes. We'll try to keep it brief for you, Ben, so we don't have to go back and update all the libraries.
Sounds good. All I'll say is, the desire to add lambdas is selfishly coming from a place of us wanting to make them load bearing very fast. Boshin is the guy who's been breathing down my neck where are the Lambdas? Where are the Lambdas? We want them running production queries soon. So when that happens, I imagine I will suddenly become a lot less excited about breaking changes. But at this present moment, they're fine with me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was it. And then Ben, take it that won't be implemented culture.
Yeah, I added that just now a second ago because someone just opened a ticket today. I don't mean to call them out in particular. That just like felt like the kind of thing that I could just tell right off the bat is not something we would implement. It basically had to do with like LLM query relations. And I was wondering if in those cases, what is the appropriate cultural way to handle those things? Because from my perspective, it feels like the right thing to do is to just write a nice message explaining why it might not fit within the bounds of the project and then close the issue, because I would rather not have a bunch of issues that potentially won't be implemented pile up. But of course, if one of you sees this issue and you think it's really important and should be implemented, don't let me stop you. But yeah.
If possible, just direct them to how they could achieve what they want. Like, I don't see any reason that there couldn't be a standard extension to Substrate for unstructured operators.
Mhm.
Yeah, this for me is a very flat. Like I also saw this one as like, I don't know if it makes one, if we have the appetite or the capacity to actually get this in, and even if we did, if we would want to. But as a like, make an extension pack and share that. And it's like, hey, here's the set of semantic relations in protobuf that you can share across systems that care about these things. Because I would have a lot of other questions about like, do we need a predicate, a join that takes a predicate, which is a string, versus a function that takes, like, there's a lot of questions that I would have about this.
Yeah, my
the
question was like, why we need all those like separate things? Where the standard rail actually doesn't fit in the model. The way so I don't know. Like to me, everything just look like I mean, if you have even like custom function, like user functions, that should be fine. Like join custom LLM predicate, sure, you can encode this like LLM query in a say Substrate LLM package functions.
Yeah,
return Boolean, whatever.
So it sounds like the answer is, hey, we probably don't have interest in upstreaming this directly into the core repo, but we encourage you to, contribute an extension set. And here are the docs for how you would do that in your own separate repo.
So I don't know. I don't know that I agree with that pattern.
Or which
But with like, yeah, we're probably not going to do this here. I feel like I don't know the answer to that. I don't know whether that's true at all. Like I'm like, I understand that there are new things happening in the world, and there's way that we have done things for a long time. And I don't like to get about, hey, here's this new shiny thing. Let's like respond to it, and like, hey, we need to add crypto operators to or whatever to Substrate. I get that feeling. At the same time, I don't want to to me, it's like my thought would be, rather than saying like shutting the door, if you will, and I'm not saying that's exactly shutting the door, but it kind of feels a little bit like it is. I'd be much more like, hey, let's start with a very small use case. This is a lot, right? I just went and looked at the thing. It is a lot, right? And so it's like, hey, let's start with an initial use case that you think would be useful. Like, what do you think is a use case that we could solve, right? Like, so Lotus, I went and looked at Lotus. I haven't read the paper. I don't know any of this. This is all in the last 20 seconds that I've looked at this stuff.
Okay.
But like, I'm like, Lotus has 130 forks and 1,500 stars. So now there's a lot of AI tourism going on right now. so you don't really know whether stars and forks actually mean anything these days. But you're like, well, maybe there's something that's meaningful here, and there's actually a use case. And someone's excited about trying to. I don't know this person. This person seems to have very little GitHub activity at all, so it's very hard to know if this is someone who just said come up with a PR that ask Codex to come up with a PR that's like Lotus for Substrate, and this is what he got. I don't know, or he worked for fucking it's a lot of content, so he could have worked for 3 days on it, or he could have asked an AI to do it in 7 minutes. I don't have no idea, but my suggestion would be is rather than focusing on the abstract, focus on the concrete, which is hey, what do you think what would be the first use case that we should be trying to solve with Substrate, right? Because and give examples, right? Hey, right now we're trying to make in Datadog, we're trying to make 2 different processing systems work together to collaboratively do this stuff. So is it because Lotus wants to have a representation to work with external systems? Is it they're working on a second system and wants to use Lotus as a front end? What is it that they're actually trying to solve for a use case? Rather than to me, this is well, if you were a committer on the project and you're yeah, we should work on this, you have a huge amount of karma. Sure, this is a lot of work that might make sense, right? But coming up with a giant design.
Projects for this? I think you were saying something about the committer. Andrew.
Hi there. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. So for disclosure, this is this was raised by a colleague of mine in IBM research. So and I was going to bring this up at the end, but Vic's got there first. Thanks. So he's been working on this for a while, and I asked him to post this as an issue today, so I could bring it up with a view to how do we go about discussing this, because we can bring him in and present it on a future call.
I think focusing on use cases is the key thing, right?
I agree. Yeah,
because I Substrate is kind of academic in general. I'm gonna be honest. It is a little bit academic, especially early on. But it is really easy for us to all navel gaze if we don't have concrete use cases.
So we could definitely talk about use cases, because this is something that we're actively looking at for use in a product.
Yeah. But I mean, but more concrete. Let's solve a use case as a group. The extent, your team, the team here. Let's solve a use case and be hey, let's have a win. Because I kind of feel that's one of the things that we struggle with Substrate is let's just get wins and have wins we can talk about to create more momentum. Because taking on another 25 or whatever it is, 7, I don't know what it is, number of relations that none of us understand is a lot. And so being able to say oh wow, yeah, that's totally a use case and I see how that fits is probably the initial. You could hear it actually on the call, right? You just heard it, which is everybody's what is this shit? This is just AI slop, right? That's the initial response that I think more and more of us get for completely new ideas. Is you're oh, is this really an idea, or is this an idea that an AI came up with? I think. Yeah.
Sorry, just to clarify, I don't think it's a S word, but when I just first read it, I don't see why we cannot represent this in using the existing relations. So that was my first impression, because just skimming through, this is just yet another predicate or something like that. So I don't see anything fundamentally different from.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good example, right? I've seen in other systems where they just basically introduce a new function, which is distance or something, similarity of these 2 strings,
sure,
right?
Yeah.
Or whatever. And then you can use joins with that function instead. And so, so thinking through that and being okay, here's the use cases and here's what's really different,
right?
Versus what is the same but with new expressions, or and I think there's probably some of both. I think there are probably new relation types, right?
Could be,
but
very could be. Maybe fit into this composite model, right?
That could be true too. I agree with that.
Example, you can think about how to model it, and maybe we we come to the agree with you where we actually do need new relations for this, or maybe we can figure out new ways of encoding. Actually, we can have functions LLM or functions semantic for some of the functions. We might need new table functions for certain things. What are the capabilities we actually need? Where relations are kind of like the big hammer of like the most powerful thing we have available to model things, but they're also the most expensive to add to the system. Which is, I think, whenever we think about adding relations, it tends to get very like. There's a lot of what I'm looking for. We look at it quite hard, or we look at it quite like intensely, which is why when we see like 12 new relations at once, it's like, okay, that's a lot of work. But if we can model this as like one of the lower cost things, in the same way that we talked about adding JSON as a core type for a while, and that's kind of quite hard, versus JSON as an extension type, lower barrier to entry. Maybe eventually we do promote it, but like, yeah, like the relations specifically are the most powerful tool we have. And I think going through examples so we can actually see what are you trying to model, all the alternatives we can use that don't require that full power, and going from there. Because I do actually want to enable, like, I don't want to block people's use cases. I want to enable them. And part of the goal of having all the extensions was to make it easy to be like, not everything needs to be core. Maybe this could be an extension pack or somewhere in the middle where we can have functions in the core to model this stuff that work in conjunction with the core relations.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways through this, but I think it is driven through use cases.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I'd say there is that, like, you know, in any of these situations where we're thinking about new relations, what we try to do is look at several systems and how they model these things, and try to think about it in that context. And so I'd be like, okay, well, like, hey, let's go find, like, for use case X, how do these 5 systems solve for it? And you know, Lotus may have a certain model for it, but I have no idea whether Lotus already did that. I don't know. As I said, I haven't read the paper. But like, you know, if there are a bunch of systems that solve for like semantic join or something, like, how do we match those things? So, but yeah, so I think, Ben, I would say in general, and this is where it's not this is a community, like I'm one voice in the community, but I would be generally inclined to try to get, when someone creates a contribution or engages that looks rich, right? My goal is more to get them, is to find a baby step to get started, and say, and look for that, as opposed to like closing the door or what, giving them a brush off. And that's an overstatement, but like, hopefully it makes sense. Like, it's just like,
No, it makes
like,
sense.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I feel like I am walking. I mean, I just named that ticket just as a potential example, but yeah, the questions, you know, about the general best practice, and I think I'm broadly in agreement, which is kind of, let's structure it around a use case, talk about existing engine support, and then if there just happens to be no follow-up in the future, then that can be an opportunity to close it if it just seems like that is the dead end.
Yeah, I feel like we talked about that recently, and I'm still in support of that, which is like a dead ticket cleanup.
Yeah.
There's a PR open. Yeah. The making things stale. I messed up the YAML. You know, who's ever messed up YAML before in their life? And so,
First person.
Yeah. But there's another PR open that I think will fix the YAML. We'll see. It's really unfortunate that it's hard to test GitHub
I was
actions.
blocking it because I was like, I'm gonna go look for all the issues and action ones that aren't stale, and I'm like, yeah, I need to stop trying to do things that are impossible. So I'm just gonna merge that in now.
Well, you know, the what is it, the Rails guys, that's DHH or whatever his name is like, hey, there's no point in keeping old issues open, because if they become important again, people will reopen them.
I guess if people
Like,
care about
so,
it, I'll come back. But
yeah, if someone cares about it, if they're going to post on the thing and be like, hey, why the fuck did you close this? It's really important, right?
Cool.
I agree.
Yeah, we are over time, so I do want to let people go. But thank you, Andrew, for writing that context. That was quite helpful, because I definitely did this morning. I was like, okay, where do we go from here? Like, how do we action this? It's good to know that there's a real person behind it.
Yeah.
Put actual effort into it. Now I'm like, cool. Okay, there's a person looking at this. Good. Okay, this is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where it's best to have the discussion, whether it's in the issue or to do it on this call.
My suggestion is probably both. Yeah. The other thing I'd say though is that, like, this is something, like, all of you guys have people who are new people who are coming to open source communities. It's good to give a little backstory. Like this is one of those weird things where like you've never seen this guy before, and it's a giant message, and there's no context. It's like, hey, let's introduce 15 new features, and you're like, who is this, right? And so it's not that people need to have karma to be able to suggest or request things, but making it more personal, I think actually is helpful, right? Like it's like, oh, this is a person who's like working on this stuff. Because yeah, like honestly, when I look at this, I see a giant thread, and then I go click on his GitHub. He has 2 followers, and he's made 1 GitHub contribution this year, and it's that issue. I'm like, oh, so this is a spam account.
One of the worst things about all of the LLM stuff lately is it does sometimes make me question contributions to be like, I can't tell if a person wrote this or an LLM wrote this, and in some cases, I hope an LLM wrote it. And having the human vouching, no, there's an actual person behind this who cares about it, works with you, Andrew. It's like, okay, this is a real person that you work with, that you like talk to. Like, cool, okay, that helps me a lot. But like, yeah, in the vacuum these days, it's like,
yeah. Remember, there's a lot of people who are prejudiced against LLM written things. Victor's apparently amongst them.
I'm only
Sorry,
prejudiced.
that was in jest. I wasn't trying to hurt your feelings. I just like, yeah.
I will share in.
I only want to read stuff that LLMs write, so you know.
Yeah, it's easy reading, you know.
My job these days has been to like review PRs for 4 hours a day, and I definitely noticed when it's not people. Anyways, okay, we're definitely getting off topic and over time, so thanks everyone. I'll stop the recording.
So my suggestion is that we push the next meeting to be a 3rd week out.
In the new year, not the
sense?
31st of December or January.
Yeah,
Or
I
just
feel like
skip.
New Year's Eve or New Year's Eve is probably not the best day for a session. So
We typically skip so that we don't mess up with other meetings that are also potentially bi-weekly.
oh, that's a fair point.
Yeah, we'll meet in a month then.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And we can continue this discussion on issues and Slack in the meantime. But also, yeah, happy holidays, everyone. Don't work too hard except to review Ben's PR.